authentic. Connected, structured, authentic, connected. I'm a good lad. Structured, authentic.
Good morning. It's Mark Chubahusky with MCZ Align, and this is Align Health Insights podcast number 9 with my dear friend Neel Madhukar with the Luma Group. Say hello to the audience. Neil, how you doing, man?
Hey everyone, really thrilled to be here, Mark. Let's go.
Let's go. All right, look, let's get right into it. Okay, so can you start a bit, by sharing your background and journey into the intersection of technology, AI, and healthcare? And as a follow-on, tell us a little bit about Luma Group, who you are as an organization, and how Luma is using AI in their process.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long-winded answer, but I'll
Good.
start a little bit about myself. So if you would have met me, I don't know how I've been like 15, 20 odd years ago, you would have met this like chubby little Indian kid from Tennessee who like all he wanted to do was be a doctor because he loved just watching Scrubs and House on TV, and he was like,
I
this
love
is
that.
awesome. Um, And I continued on that path from most of my childhood life. I went to college, was pre-med, took the MCAT, was fully ready to go to med school. But along the way, had kind of an experience that I think a lot of people who end up in healthcare have, is that ended up losing a very, very close family member to a rare form of cancer.
Okay.
And, what kind of struck me through that experience was his physicians, his care team. They were all fantastic. But ultimately, there wasn't just that much they could do because we just didn't know that much about
Yeah.
cancer, right? Doctors were still limited by the drugs they had available. This was early 2000s, right? So like, we didn't have huge sequencing, technologies. Like it was early days, right? And,
Yeah.
you know, I think that was the moment I first got more interested in the idea of like, how do you actually think about healthcare, not just from the application or the physician side, but actually from more the research side. Now, I was a kid who loved math and loved science and never really thought of a way to combine those two, but was really, really lucky that as I was going through this like thinking process of, hey, medical research, etc., I met a mentor of mine who kind of offered me a chance to work at a first DoD funded project working on the RNA sequencing data set for prostate
Mm.
cancer. One of the very first. And they were thinking through all the things from the ground up, like how do you even think about this data? How do you even process this data? How do we make sense of these massive data sets of
Yeah.
it was just letters. And that was, I think, in my mind, the first opportunity I saw to combine kind of the math side of my brain with the
Hmm.
biology side of my brain. So after falling in love with that experience, kind of made the decision to go pursue a PhD at Weill Cornell, the tri-institutional PhD program. um, was a really, really cool opportunity because I got a chance to kind of sit and do my PhD at the intersection of precision medicine, patient care, and research, right? So was interacting with physicians, with tumor boards, but also interacting with wet lab biologists and computational biologists. And got a chance to kind of work on some really interesting problems about like how do you really use data to understand what drugs are doing in a body, in a cell, and use that information to design better drugs, design new drugs, better match drugs to patients. Um, I would say even during my PhD, I had no idea what I wanted to do afterwards. My dad was a professor, so I was like, I'll be a professor. Like that sounds fun. And then over the course of my PhD, realized that was not fun.
All right.
What I've learned, but it was not fun for me. But what I really, really loved doing was kind of thinking through problems and thinking about like how do we build this into something that could be used, right? During my PhD, I got a chance to see how things were used for patients and drug developers, but wanted to continue on that journey. And got this really, really cool opportunity to kind of start up a company, One Through Biotech, from my PhD work. So went on the founder journey for a while. Was CEO of that company for 6, 7 years, something like that. Got to see kind of the early days of what it takes to build an AI drug discovery technology, partner with pharma, build our own asset pipeline. Got to make many, many, many mistakes along the way. But really kind of build and see and kind of further some like think of that intersection of how the technology mix with, I don't want to say traditional because they're changing so much, but let's just, for the sake of simplicity, traditional drug discovery and development process. After kind of my startup journey after 1.3, I continued to kind of spend more time at that intersection. First at a set of, different biotech companies, like the pharma sector, where I was, working on that product tech intersection angle, and then more recently at the venture capital side, like working with firms like RA and now Luma, thinking about how can we use and ingest AI into the way we evaluate companies, but also to build better companies and then think about things there. So I would say have always spent most of my career just really, really privileged and being able to think about really fun problems and think about how do we take what's out in the tech world, what's out in the machine learning world, now the AI world, and solve what I think is maybe the biggest problem of our lifetime is like how do we understand the human body better and how do we make ourselves healthier?
Yeah.
So now the second part of your question. So what is Luma and what do we do?
Yeah. What are you doing?
I, I think one thing I love about Luma is the people that are so passionate. So you'll probably hear a slightly different answer whenever you ask, but I'll give my answer.
Yeah.
So Luma, we are a private venture capital firm focused on supporting the next generation of innovative therapies, diagnostics, and medical devices. You know, what we do is we focus on partnering with early founders, early entrepreneurs to identify kind of really what we think is going to be the breakthrough technology, right? And I really focus on breakthrough because as a firm, our DNA is it's really focused on, hey, we don't want to just do like a Me Too combo. We want to think about like what's next, right? So
Yeah.
identifying, partnering with those founders and helping them build the amazing companies and tools and technologies that we think that can be within them. You know, amazing set of partners, kind of ranging from deep bio experience, operating experience, and deep finance. My role at Luma as CTO, kind of their AI lab initiative, really focuses on thinking through, hey, while we're identifying these companies, while we're working with these partners, how can we be better at our jobs ourselves? And put it another way, right? Like we love when we meet a founder, when we meet a founding team, when they have a smart way to combine AI technology into traditional biotech processes, right? Like I love when I meet a founder and they, hey, in addition to amazing experimentation, amazing science, we're also injecting amazing technology and thinking through how those be combined. And at Luma, what we kind of asked ourselves a while ago was we want this from our founders, but as VCs, why don't we also want this for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. It is truly crazy how many biotech VCs and tech VCs you see investing in like really, really cutting edge AI stuff. And their AI, their tools, their methods are thousands of Slack messages, disconnected Google Docs, notes and notebooks, and hey, I think this associate met with this company. Can we
Yeah.
call and see what they think? Do we
Yeah.
remember? Call this expert, right? And that disconnect is a little bit crazy when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
And especially when as biotech VCs and as people in any sort of biotech strategy, our job is what we really want to be good at is identifying what are those diamonds in the rough. How do we support them? So I joined Luma to really think about how can we elevate ourselves and build technology and enable us to do that too. And really leading what we call Labby, our internal AI for biotech and tech. Can talk a little bit more about what that means and kind of what we're doing in the nitty gritty. But really what I think about my role is how do we build a platform that allows us to, one, find the best companies, two, figure out insights and science that other people might be missing, and then three, support those companies in the best way, right? Because we can talk a little bit more, right? Like the questions we're asking are the same questions the companies are asking and the founders are asking. So how do we build internal technology that allows us to not just be a bunch of guys in a room and men and women in the room saying this the science sounds cool, but really apply more systematic, algorithmic, data-driven thought processes in our decisions. I think be what we hope most biotech VCs in the future kind of lean towards.
Yeah. I love that. Look, we know that traditional pharma and the way that they acquire new targets is a little antiquated. It's very relationship driven, and the target selection has been underwhelming over the past decade. And using and leveraging these tools and really figuring out a comprehensive approach to what's out there seems to be a wise approach. I'm really glad you guys are doing it, and I hope other people are doing it because something needs to change. Um, Look, I wasn't going to ask this question, but I feel necessary just based off of what you're saying to me. What you're really claiming here is that the investments that you're making are somewhat paradigm shifting. Yeah.
That's the goal, right? And I I don't know if you follow that Twitter. VCs congratulate themselves. So I wanna take a little bit of a step back and say, you know, founders we're investing in, the tools we're building, right? Those are the people, those are the companies doing amazing work, right? Like our goal is to try and identify kind of what we think could move the needle, move healthcare, humanity, tools, etc. forward, and focus on the ones where we think that's the biggest opportunity, right? I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
the amazing thing about healthcare and bio is, you can build a really good company in a really good firm, but by also doing something that's really good for people, right?
yeah.
So I think that's what we focus on, right? Like we want to find those investments, find those companies, find those founders, find those teams that drive that shift paradigms, whatever you want to say, and think about how we can help support them on that journey.
Let's go meta here. And this is another question that I wasn't going to ask, but I'm really interested because, I almost think to myself, paradigm shifts require patient capital and a lot of it. Right. Just not speaking for your firm, but like, overall, we've seen the misalignment. We have seen a lot of really great technologies not go to later funding rounds. Right. What is your position? How do you kind of, are you picking up what I'm throwing down here?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think it's challenging because there's the power of me. So I'd say there's two, in my head, there's two kind of lines of thought. There's one of, I completely agree. I think you need patient capital. I think you need capital that can support companies in the long term. I think you capital that understands that, especially in healthcare, things take some time. And sometimes the most amazing translations of technology often happen later in a way you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
And specifically, as we at Luma, we invest in the earlier stages. Oftentimes, very early clinical, preclinical, right? It's a different ballgame, right? So on one hand, I completely agree. I think we need patient capital. We have to think about company development, creation, tool development in a way that is, you know, representative of the time things take. On the other hand, right, there's the founder part of my brain, which is, as much as I would love to say, hey, every capital allocator in the world should be more patient, like we sometimes have to face
Mhm.
the fact that they're not, right? And you have firms out there that are operating on stricter timelines that, don't fully understand and don't give technologies that time. And, there's a lot of different aspects of that out there. And I think that as founders, you kind of have to balance both. Well, as companies, you have to balance both, right? You have to understand that you're on a long journey, but you have to think through how you can keep momentum building along that journey. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we, at Luma, but also personally when I talk to founders, is to think about is where can you build that momentum? And how can you show both the patient capital that you're on that long scale journey, but also the
Yeah.
new capital to do, and not even just new capital, right? New employees, right? Keep employee morale, new sales. Like your job as a founder, this company is always kind of to be building on that momentum and drawing people to the company, whether that's money, partners, employees, etc. So how do you balance those two in a way that makes sense? Um, because as much as maybe I'd love a world in which it's like, hey, it'll take me 12 years to go develop this drug, I'll be back to you in 12 years. Like that's just not the world we're in, right?
No,
And to be honest, I actually don't even know if that's a better world, if that would be enough.
no, I don't
Yeah,
think so either.
yeah. So it's so how do you balance those two? And I'd say both in terms of building Labby, but also in terms of Luma, like we try and think through those and say like, hey, especially as a newish fund, right? How can we take our experience of learning? How can we help guide founders? And as we build out the AI pieces, how can those tools help guide founders and companies along that journey as well?
Yeah, yeah. I think when I look at leaders and when I'm placing leaders in my firm, well, on behalf of my customers, humility is a huge thing I'm looking for in leadership. And it just reminds me of some things that you're saying because you have to have a leader that understands that when things go wrong, you have to readjust and course correct quickly, right? You don't want to overfund and die on a hill of bad ideas.
Exactly. Well, that's what biotech is. Biotech is just experiments. And it's crazy because like you think about other industries, and if you went to another industry and you said 90% of my experiments are gonna fail, they'd be like, that's absurd, get fired. But if you had a 10% success rate in biotech across millions of different things, or 20% success rate, that's pretty good,
Pretty
like
good.
it's better than what we have right now. And I think it's wild because you even see kind of at the pharma level, right? Like assets don't work, clinical trials don't work. You got to adjust. And it's kind of like the best pharma leaders oftentimes aren't the ones who got a drug approved. They're the ones who got a drug approved through many failures, or they kept the company going when things weren't working, right? And I think like that sort of humility, resilience is crucial, but also something I don't know if you get as much in other industries because it's just wired a little bit different in biotech, right? You have
Yeah.
to kind of willing to say that things are gonna go poorly and that's okay. We got to readjust and we got to pick our winners. And same for the investment world, right? Like, you know, no investment fund is 100% unicorn, right? So
No.
like it's how do you support them? How do you think through, and how when things goes wrong for a company, how are you not saying like, okay, well, like we're not in this and you, it's like, hey, how can we help you course correct? So
Yeah.
I think that's important, not just at the founder level, but also like
Yeah.
throughout the team.
Well, speaking of, right, Luma's advisory network includes some, Fortune 500 execs, biotech founders. It seems really robust. How are you using their expertise to help scale the startups you're investing in?
Yeah, no, it's I'm gonna go back to this idea. I'll just speak for myself here, but like, we know what we don't know, right? And I think that's we like, as an investor, you oftentimes spend time across various different landscapes, right? We
Yeah.
might review an oncology company in the morning, and neuroscience company at lunch, and a rare disease company in the afternoon, right? And no one in the world is an expert on all of those things, right? Like at least not that I. And I think for our job is we want to be like, we understand that. How can we be smarter and fill in the gaps that we need? And I think that's where like our amazing advisory network comes in, is they provide that guidance, right? On clinical strategy, regulatory pathways, pricing and market access, trial design, whatever you want, right? And like that, not just to us as we're thinking through, but ultimately to the companies, right? Saying, hey, once you invest, like you don't just have the Luma Group, you have access to our network. You have access to people who have experience way beyond us. And I often think on a small scale, right? When I look back at my founder journey and the companies I've worked in at the early stages, I've made so many mistakes. I don't nearly have the level of experience that some of our advisors does. And I think what they do and what our team does is we try and help founders avoid making those painful lessons, right? Things such as simple as how do you think about these problems in a way, and how do you have that sounding board? I always say the most valuable thing to a founder sometimes is that sounding board, people you can go to and you can talk to them. That's what the Luma advisory network really allows us to do.
That's
And it's
great.
also, when we think about Labby and our AI, it allows us to complement these advisors, right? Because we allow to combine kind of their intuition, their experience with kind of the data signal and the information we're getting from the world, and combine those together to allow us to very quickly get smart on things, but also support kind of multiple different data streams, saying, hey, founders, here's what the data's saying, here's what other companies out there, but also talk to people who have done this before, right?
That's
And,
great.
you know, bridge those two worlds in a way that we think is going to be kind of paramount for success, building credibility, and yeah, just moving things forward.
Sounds like a good strategy. So, looking at the current funding landscape in biotech, including geopolitical factors, economic pressures, what advice would you give early stage founders seeking investment, specifically in biotech?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it feels like so many years everyone's like fundraising is hard, starting a company is hard. And I think that's always gonna be the case. I think for founders, what I would say is like it's important to know that even in bad fundraising environments, capital is not absent, it's just selective.
Mm.
So what that means is, it's not I find it less valuable to say like, hey, compared to what people raised on 2 to 3 years ago, but like think about, as an investor, as a founder pitching to investors, right? Like really what you're competing for is attention, right? Investors might hear 10 pitches a day. And of those 10 pitches, right, maybe they're investing or interested in like one to a follow-on conversation. So you have to basically come to a place where understand what are the companies around, what do they focus on, what are they thinking through. I think sometimes for early stage founders, we get too caught up in our own technology and say, here's this great piece of technology I developed. here's why it'll change the world, great. But without as much set, thought into like, what does that landscape actually look like? What are
Yeah.
people about? And going beyond, right? Especially for early stage technologies, right? I think I find myself continually so impressed with them when founders have thoughts on it's a preclinical technology, but they have thoughts on that clinical landscape. They've gone that step ahead and being like, hey, like, what does this look for? Like, not just in the clinical, what does this look for in the approval landscape? So, as a founder, you need to think of showing like why now, why this mechanism or platform across various different stages, and then also why the economics make sense. I think,
Yeah.
and this is particularly true for, I'd say, scientist-driven founders, right? I think I'm a huge fan of this founder-led biotech movement, right? Of younger founders coming from science, building their own companies. But I think what's important to them to know is it's not just the science story yourself, right? It's an economic story, right? At the end of the day, you've got to think through if this works, if we make this drug, if we make this device, if we make this diagnostic, what does that look like 5, 10 years down the road, right? Are you a third line of therapy? Are you first line of therapy? Are you going through this approval pathway? What other companies, what other drugs are going to be out in the market at that time, right? So combining that commercial logic with the clinical logic, right? Like
Yeah.
how patient outcomes, right? How is this going to reduce onset, etc., right? So combining those stories in such a way, because that's the questions we ask, right? And I talk about building AI tools, right? The AI tools are allowing us to answer those questions. It's allowing us to come in and say, hey, we have this new piece of technology. We maybe understand what the oncology landscape looks like today, but what's it going to look like in a year, 6 months, right? What clinical trials are going to be that? Assume those clinical trials are successful. What does that mean, right? Is there still an opportunity for this drug to make a significant impact
Yeah.
if they work, if they don't work, right? So as a founder, as an early stage founder, let's think through those, right? You're not going to have a full medical team. You're not going to have a commercial team. We're not expecting fully thought out, amazingly researched, 100-page McKinsey level answers. But I would always recommend founders like come in and just know those are the questions people are going to be asking and be
Yeah.
transparent, right? Say if you don't know the answer, that's fine, right? But talk through your thinking, talk through how you could help, talk through kind of where you go through in that diligence process. So I'd say on one hand that. The second is, we talked a little bit about patient capital and timing, right?
Yeah.
In a tough fundraising climate, become a little bit more disciplined, right? And what that means is think about early proof points, right? Think about clear paths to de-risking, right? Maybe you're going to get the drug or the major clinical readouts in 3 years, maybe, right? But what are you going to get along the way that allow us partners, investors, advisors to show, hey, this is working, we're on the right path, right? Because especially in a world where failure is so common, how are you going to know if you need to course correct, right? So what do those
Yeah.
look like? What do those clear paths to de-risking look like? So articulate those early milestones, articulate those first validation loops, right? Think about a clear path or a clear plan for indication selection, things like that. Like I'd say, you've got to do a little bit of extra work, and it's not the extra work. Oftentimes, is not I ran next to experiment or I recruited here, I read another paper. You have to think about the business side of it. And then lastly, right, when capital climates are tough, you know, pick investors with real conviction in the space.
Yeah.
Right. And I say the space at multiple levels. One, biotech in general, right? We saw during COVID that we got a lot of non-biotech capital enter, right? Sometimes that had some great impacts, some very negative impacts, but you've got, for lack of a better word, that tourist capital is kind of left a little. You still see struggles, right? So when you think about people who are investing in the space, think about like, is this a one-off investment for them? Do they actually care about the space, right? Is this something that they're doing because they're interested, or do they have deep conviction? Do they have the expertise to bring beyond just capital? And that doesn't mean they have to be a pure life science investor, right? Especially if you're a tech platform, right? Like they could be a tech investor, but make sure they understand and what they're bringing, and try and find partners who have seen cycles before, whether that's a drug development cycle, a technology software development cycle, diagnostic development cycle, right? Maybe even if they're young, fun, but like they've seen those, they've understood those, they know kind of what hurdles you're gonna expect, right? So on one level that, and then I think to go deeper, right? Like one thing I love hearing from founders about Luma is, even after we've invested, I was on a call a few weeks ago with one of the founding team, the teams we've invested in. and we were just joking about our diligence process. And they were like, "Oh, you guys actually asked the most in-depth diligence questions, and that was fun for me as a scientist because I got to dig in with you." I love hearing that because maybe it's extra work on our end, but I want to be at a firm where we're deeply trying to understand, right?
Yeah.
Um, Not only because it puts us in a better place to decide if we want to make an investment, but it puts us in a better place to help those teams after we invest, even if we don't invest, right? To help the next team. And I think as a founder, when you're pitching to investors and when you're thinking about which investors to pitch to, like, keep that filter in mind. You know, you can do a lot of pre-filtering when you're doing your fundraising process, like, hey, which investors do I want to talk to? And a lot of times you can think of like, do I think this investor is going to understand enough? Have I heard from this investor going to understand enough that can really dig in? Because, you know, at the end of the day, what can kill a fundraising process just as much as a poor company and poor science, etc., is poor time management, right? If you talk to 300 investors, but 200 of those 300 investors are probably a bad fit to begin with, right? You're just killing your momentum,
Yeah.
and ultimately, I'd argue kind of killing morale a little bit, right? It's
Yeah.
hard for the founder to hear no over and over, right? As much as
Yeah.
I talk about resilience, right? Like, it was really hard for me as a founder, right? It continues to be hard. Like, once we talk about humility and overcoming failures, right? It's never easy. So
No.
think about that, right? When you think about your pitch, your platform, right? Bring it all together. And, I wish I could say this was an easy solution to this and, just make this modification and you can adopt this fundraising climate. Like, it's harder, right? But the passion as founders, all those things, like, that shines through. So, just continue to tell the story in a way that feels authentic to you, in a way that matches your company. But, just try and think through the things that, we might be thinking or we might be talking about when the pitch is over and, we're back in our ICs or investment when he's chatting about things.
Very comprehensive, man. Young founders, play that and replay that. Uh, Good tips, Neil, really. Okay, so look, from a personal perspective, what emerging trends in personalized medicine or AI biomed ideas are you most excited about? And how is AI enabling them to happen?
Cool. All right, this is awesome. Okay. So when we think about AI medicine, right? We've seen a lot of what's called AI for chemistry, right? Some
Yeah.
of the companies coming out there thinking about how do you design better molecules, how do you optimize that process, and I think we're still early days of that, but we've seen there's a lot of momentum there. There's a lot of companies being built. What I am really, really excited about is the AI for biology part of it, right?
Hmm.
Most new biology is still figured out. Scientists running experiments in labs, running technology, right? But like, how can we think about AI? And maybe I don't even just say AI. Let's say technology, right? Because I think
Yeah.
nowadays, when someone says AI, with the rise of LLMs, people think and mean different things. But
Yep.
how can you use technology to find new insights? I am really excited to see where that goes, right? And we have people approaching it from different angles. We have people trying to build kind of AI scientists, right? LLMs, like, how can you tell your LLMs to ask questions and maybe uncover new insights that way, right? You have people trying to build new insights from going to the data and building amazing, like, algorithms for genomic and foundational omics data, right? They're like, can we use this to draw new insights? That's what I'm really excited about, right? The rise of, that. And then also thinking about kind of on the company level, like, AI native biotech, right? So I would say historically, it's weird to use the word historically with AI, but you'd say tech, right? It's often been a support function in companies, right? It's been a scientist or an experimental scientist who has an idea, and then he goes to the computational team and says, hey, can you validate this? Yes or no? And sometimes he or she will be about it, sometimes they won't.
Yeah.
I am really excited to see companies that are built around AI reasoning, right? Saying like, hey, it's in the room, for lack of a better word, right? We're using it to guide experiments. That maybe I don't want experiments to be, but like, they're working together. So I think that's going to be really important when you get to these like really exciting areas, kind of like patient specific modeling, combination therapy optimization, which, like, those problems are really hard and complex, right? And you have to think about how do you build a framework where you're running those experiments, right? Experiments, computational and experimental, wet lab based, right? That are allowing us to answer those in block steps. So kind of that AI way of reasoning, thinking about how and building AI systems that think like scientists or think like biology, um, and then combining those things together. So I think those are a few of the areas, right? I think I believe, and I've always got this dream of, you know, combinatorial care, which I think is something that's, similar to how we think about AI understanding biotech, right? Like, I don't think 50 years from now there's going to be one drug that solves everything. I think biology is too complex. I think we're going to think about drug regimens, and we're already seeing that in a lot of indications, right? But that's such a hard question to answer, right?
Yeah.
We like, we don't have the tools to understand single therapies. We definitely don't have that thing in drug therapy. It's combinatorial therapy, right? And when you combine that with kind of lifestyle factors, patient genomics, timing of therapies, et cetera, priming, right? Like, that's a difficult problem, but I think solving that is just really exciting. It's not even solving, just getting closer to that solution really exciting. Saying like, hey, can you use technology and AI and tools to allow us to understand the biological pathways implications better, understand which companies drugs will interact, understand how patients evolve, that's our application system. I think that's going to be really exciting as we move toward a more combinatorial care environment. Um, so yeah, I don't know. That was kind of all over the place, but
No, there's just so much happening. I mean,
yeah,
that's the bottom line. But it's never going to be really just one regimen, right? It's going to be a multitude of things. Really, really cool. Biggest challenges you've seen in AI adoption with biotech, such as, like, I'll give you an example: data privacy or ethical considerations, or regulatory hurdles.
yeah, I'm gonna give a couple answers here. First is, I think there's a lot of focus on algorithms, rightly so, right? Like, they're exciting, they're sexy, right? When ChatGPT releases a new thing, everyone's like, "Oh my god, it works so much better," right? We've seen all that happen.
Yeah, yeah,
Less of a focus on data, and I don't mean data in the sense of we need more data. It's what do we do with the data we have, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I see companies tout like we generate this much data a day, and I'm like, great. And then I go into the systems and think about it, so hard to use it, right? Like, you look
yeah.
at big pharma companies. I'm sure big pharma companies are generating in tremendous amounts of
Oh
data,
yeah,
but they live in different silos. They're not
oh yeah.
they're not normalized, right? So data fragmentation is a huge blocker, and
Mm.
it is probably the least sexy problem
Oh
about
yeah,
biotech, but it's the most important one. Like, how do you bring those all together? And like, we spend so much time thinking about that at Luma, right? Like, half of our job is, hey, we've got to read clinical trials from here, then we read this press release, then we read this publication, then we talk to the founder, then we look at their deck, right? Like, and what we're trying to build at Labby, our AI system, is the ability to bring those all together into a cohesive system, because those are the same problems biotechs
yeah,
face. How do you bring that together, right? I think that also bleeds into what you mentioned, like private data, privacy, compliance. It's like, how do you do that in a way that is adherent to those, right? How can we take the data, respect patient privacy, respect all the different rules, but bring it together in a way that we can say, like, hey, let me sit all the data in front of me. And that's something I would say, you know, oftentimes there's more traditional technology. Like, they do pretty well. They have, less data types to look at, but it's done in a way where, my friends who are tech companies, they say like, hey, it's pretty easy for me to say I get all the data in one place, and then I have to figure out what to do with it. But we've built those systems. I think biotech hasn't just yet, right? We
yeah,
have
yeah.
them. So that's one area that I think is really, really important, is how do you structure that data? So
Yeah, I was thinking that too, 'cause it's all these different type of data, and like, how do you create a common data model around all of this so that you can run analytics over it, at the end of the day, right?
I think it's an unanswered question. And I think, uh you know, I'm going to date myself a little bit by saying this, but back in the day, there was one type of data model, like 20, 30 years ago, right? Then we were focused on another. And now with LLMs, everything is text based, and people reading large text over RAG systems, etc. And they work for some great problems. But like, I think sometimes I feel like we have to almost take a little bit of a step back from what's the latest, hypiest technology and be like, what actually makes sense for this data, right?
Yeah,
So we at Luma and at Labby, I spend a lot of time thinking about graphs, right? And graphs not in the like box plot, but like networks, because that's kind of how we think about biology, right? Different genes connected to another, pathways connected to another, organ systems connected to another, right? How do we apply that some sort of data reasoning, data feedback, data thinking to our processes, right? And say, like, how do we structure data in a way that makes sense, that we can trace connections, that those connections mean something, that it's not just a bunch of data in a bucket, it's a bunch of data in a bucket structured in a way that makes sense to us. So I think that's an unanswered question. That's one I spend a lot of my time thinking about, but I think that's going to be a big challenge to AI adoption in biotech that we're going to go forward.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'll say maybe two more very quick ones, right? One I think is many years ago, while at GSM, like Vijay Pandey wrote something about black boxes and AI in healthcare, right? And I think that's still an unanswered question. On one hand, if we have a method that works amazingly, maybe you don't care how it works. But on the other hand, right, we have to convince people, right? Like we have to convince ourselves. We're making oftentimes $1 billion decisions and huge time scale, but like I want to understand how the information's passing, how a model came to its conclusions, right? And to me, this is very, very related with how we think about data structure. You
Oh,
want
yeah.
to do it in such a way that you can say, hey, if I predict this, doing this will have this effect. Why do I predict that? Like, what is the path I took? So doing that in such a way that improves trust, and specifically as you're closer and closer to the clinic, right? As a patient, if I think about AI tools, right, there's patients on various ends of the spectrum. Some who want to know everything, some who just tell me what to do, but you want to be able to address both sides. And I'd say lastly, speaking about kind of trust and black box and interpretability, is it's a translation. And I don't mean translation such as translating to the clinic, I mean translation between teams. As someone who's had the unique pleasure and headache of managing teams of biologists, computer scientists, computational biologists, etc., one thing I can tell you is they oftentimes speak different languages, right? And not in a
Yeah.
negative way, it's just the way they've been trained, the way I was trained, right? A biologist, when he says something, means something very different than a computer scientist, right? And the way they talk, type skills. And I think that's something that's I think really important for companies as you think about how do you have and create teams that enable us to do that. Um, how do you have leaders who are able to communicate across those disciplines, right? And how do you do it in such a way that it's not, like I said, one purely supporting the other, but it's those two steps working in cohesion. One thing I truly, truly love about Luma is if you look at the partners, right, it's not an AI firm, right? It's not their biotech expense. But when they brought me in, it was as much of a partnership as anything I've ever worked in. It's like, hey, we're gonna tell you about our workflow, our challenges, but you also tell me about what you think, right? And when we build teams and as we grow our processes, it's very much a lot of hand in hand, right? Hey, we want to partner with pharma, we also want to partner with tech. How does tech improve this, right? I don't want you just to build tech that allows us to do our job better. I want you to think about building tech that maybe changes how we do our job because we need to change, right? So I think that's a huge challenge across all of AI biotech, which is just getting those translation layers in place and having leaders who are able to speak both languages.
Very cool. Yeah, big problems. Love the way you answered the question, man. Uh, so look, as we look toward 2030, what do you predict will be the most impactful AI innovations in human health and longevity?
Well, obviously, Lavi, what we're building.
Yes,
No, maybe I'll speak. Not that notwithstanding, which I'll talk about this a little at the end. Well, okay. Actually, let me take a step back. I do think there's going to be, on the back end, I think we're going to see a lot of innovations in how we think about that data side of things. I think there's a lot of, we're spending a lot of time thinking about. I think now that we've seen data, like I think we're going to come to a place where data and bio is very different than it was 5 years ago. Right? I think we're going to be able to process those in such a way and allow scientists, experts, computer scientists to have all the tools they need in front of them, and not be in a place where 5 years from now someone's like, I can't do that because I couldn't find the data. So on one hand, I 100% believe that, and honestly, that's why I'm spending my days focused on that. But taking that outside, right? I am really excited about stuff like AI-driven clinical trial design. Right? I think
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, like we're at a place where we're thinking about personalized medicine in a whole different way, right? I have this dream of, this is not 5 years in the future, maybe 50 years in the future, of like maybe a patient goes in, they get a blood test and instead of just saying, here's a drug, maybe we 3D print a drug specific to that patient in that moment, right? Like with the chemical, like everything is different, right? Maybe we think about clinical trials completely different. Um, so I think we're gonna see that, you start to see more of that in the next 5 years of like, how do you think about clinical trial design? How do you optimize clinical trial design from everything from recruitment to selection to monitoring to how the arms, different arms should work? Oh no, my Alexa's chiming in too.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Yeah,
uh, I
she
think that's
agrees.
I think, you're gonna have much deeper understanding of how different combinatorial bugs work together, right? We're seeing different data types come out. We're getting better understanding of the different systems that operate in the body. So, you know, in the use of like digital twins, virtual cells, like they allow us to kind of perturb biology in a way that previously hasn't been possible. Companies doing really great things with multi-omics. So I think we're gonna start to see more multi-omic biomarkers combined with drug mechanisms to get us basically patient selection and drug selection in a very different way.
Agreed.
Uh, and then maybe the last one, which is something that, it's not as well defined in my brain, but I think we're going to spend some more time thinking about it, is, I think LLMs are going to improve. And I probably am maybe in the minority, maybe not. I don't think Chat GPT will ever solve biology.
No.
I don't think Chat GPT 9 and 10 or 15 is going to be like the thing we need. It's going to improve and do what LLMs do and continue to do them in amazing ways. They do a lot of things amazing. And the one thing they're very good at is, of course, text analysis, right? We as scientists, whether rightfully or wrongfully, right, have a lot of our information living in text, right? Publications, right? Documents. And, as someone who maybe hates writing papers, I would maybe love a world in which it wasn't this way, but it is. I think we're going to start to see AI systems that understand that text much better. And maybe they're not going to be at the level of, hey, I can find a new target, but they can be at a level where they can say, let me understand that this world of literature and process it in a way that makes sense, right? Identify contradictions, identify cohesive trends, identify when feels movement changes, right? And we've talked about like structuring data and graphs. Maybe what they could do is LLMs could say like, hey, we're going to take this publication, structure this in a way that makes sense and combine it onto this graph. So those are a few that I'm really excited about in, the next 5 or so years to see.
Very cool. Very cool. How do you see AI influencing overall healthcare and policy in the
Yeah.
coming years? And especially in areas like funding, for investment for early stage biotech startups.
Yeah, I am thankfully not a politician, so I will say this without.
Well, yeah,
I will,
thankfully.
I will, put a little bit of my naive optimist hat on for this one.
Fair enough.
So
Someone has to.
yeah, I think we'll start to see inefficiencies in clinical development come up, right? We're gonna AI. If we have AI development, we're gonna see like, hey, what's not working, and I think that's gonna change a lot about how we think about policy in terms of clinical trials and patient access and funding, etc. We saw I forget the name, but we saw the recent executive orders from the White House kind of pushing the
The
deal.
Genius Act. Was that the Genius Act?
Maybe, yeah, I truly don't remember the name. Yeah, it
Okay.
was like maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, right? Like
Yeah.
was maybe I should have done a little bit. I should remember the name.
Don't worry about it. Just wow. Just it's okay.
Yeah, but it's pushing the Department of Energy to focus more on AI driven research, right? So I think we're starting to see from all layers of the government saying, hey, this is not going away. So I think you're going to see more, hopefully, I will think you'll see more funding towards what does AI research mean? And how does the funding for AI research have to change or is different than kind of more traditional research? As a scientist at heart, right, I'm always a proponent for more funding going towards breakthrough paradigm shifting cures. And I think it's important when we think about AI, like, hey, how could that change, right? Like, how could this change the finance? How do they change what grants get funded? How do you change how you do industry academic collaborations, right? With national labs, with giant supercomputers and pharma companies with data sets. And can we see government and healthcare policy like kind of serve as a bridge between the two? Can we think about how, with patients getting more access to their own data, like how could that fuel a data economy in a way that's both helpful for research, but also respectful of the patient and their wishes and their privacy and their data? Um, how will we, use AI to frame decision making? Right at the end of the day, right, the things we're building, Labby, It's allowing us to make better decisions and think through data better. But the goal is it's not just the Luma specific thing. Hopefully that invades, right? So when we think about policy, right, how can policymakers think about when new drugs or new medicines come up, how will that change? So I'd love to see more technology invading those sort of thinking.
Yeah.
And then also, it's we can't have a podcast nowadays and not talk about China. But I will say
Yeah.
my very brief thing is you've seen technology radically change over the last 10 years about how we develop drugs, the scale, the pace, the timelines, etc. So we're reshaping global competitiveness in biotech. We're reshaping what different countries are good at. It's becoming more of a global ecosystem. So I think that's going to change healthcare policy, right? In good ways and challenging ways for companies here, but I am not enough of a policy expert to say how, but I would say anyone building a biotech company or thinking about healthcare policy should think about that. What does it look like in a global system when different countries, different areas are very good at certain things, and how will technology enable that? And what does that mean for us as the US, but also biotech founders, companies, investors, etc.? What does that mean in terms of what the world could look like?
Yeah. Very interesting. And look, I don't want to botch all this policy stuff because I don't know the exact, but I know some of this stuff falls at the federal level, and then there's state by state, uh, you know, policies as well. So it gets quite confusing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so look, how do you assess the economic viability of an AI or ML platform in drug discovery, ensuring they not only speed up processes but also improve success rates and reduce costs?
Yeah. So I think that you hit on exactly, right? Like it's one thing on understanding the two differences, right? Are you making things faster? Are you making things better? Are you doing things you couldn't have done before? It's funny. I think you guys had Millen on your podcast a few weeks
Yeah.
ago. Yeah. I love Millen. He used to tell me something his old boss used to tell him, which is, are you doing things better or doing better things? And it's a very simple dichotomy, but it's important to understand, right? Especially when you think about drug discovery platform. You can be an amazing company doing either of those, but it's important to understand and differentiate them, right? Saying, if you come in and you're saying, hey, this process normally takes a month, my platform does it in a day. Okay, help me. Now I can understand that. And it's an easy economic journey to understand, right? I've got to validate those claims, but it's like, how much does that time saving cost? Like, are there any issues? What's your success rate? Like there's economic numbers you can assign to that. Sometimes those economic numbers are maybe on a smaller scale because it's hard when there's so many different steps. If you're working on one step, sometimes it's hard to say like this is a multi-billion-dollar company, but a lot of times it's true. Right? If you're thinking about success probability, right? It's, I'm doing the same process, but I think we can make you more successful. Right? Then I have to go into the numbers and say, is that true? And what does an increase in success point look like here? And what is that success coming in? Is it I can find less toxic drugs, I am identifying better targets, I am making sure lead optimization doesn't fail, etc. So you can focus on those pieces and say, historically, as other drug development companies or companies in the space, like how much is that worth to them? And then there's the last, which is maybe the hardest, but also the most exciting, which is do better things, which is, are you able to do something that we previously haven't been able to do? And why do I believe? Then it's a very interesting question of, in a world where that was possible, what would that world look like, right? If we were able to drug this target that's never been drugged or hit this mechanism that's never been hit, right? Like, what does that mean for the world, right? What does that mean for the clinical landscape? What does that mean for the clinical landscape with 10 years? And then we can start to say, okay, like let's assign success probability. And this is, success probability and economic value of the company, not just the platform, but I think a lot of times they're very deeply correlated, which is, how do you build those? So I always like to ask founders, it's like, assume everything works amazingly. What does that look like in 3 years and 5 years, right? Like, do you have better drugs? Do you have better targets? Do you have faster things, etc.? What is the one thing you are best at doing that no one else can? I think
Great question. Yeah.
I truly struggle with founders who say everything or give me a very broad answer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huge red flag.
It may be true. And I think oftentimes it's like, hey, like, maybe this could have, but like as a company, right? Like, I forget who was the quote that says like what kills startups isn't not enough choices, it's too many choices, right? But it's something like that.
Yeah.
You've got to focus and you've got to really as an investor who's not spending 24/7 thinking about this problem, right? Like, boil it down for me. Like, what is the one thing you can do that no one else can do?
Yeah.
Or as well as you, right? It's fine if that answer is speed or efficiency. It's, like, both are very valuable. But I think that really helps me judge economic viability, because it helps me boil down to, like, in biotech, we're oftentimes thinking binary decisions, even when, there's more option, but we tend to think, right? Like, what if this works? What if this doesn't? So make that easy for me. Say, like, what does working look like here? And allow me to kind of do the math on the back end.
Makes a lot of sense. So for aspiring professionals in AI and biotech, what skills or experiences would you prioritize for them to thrive?
Yeah, be fluent in both worlds, right? Like, think about AI, right? You don't need to be an expert in both, right? You don't need to be able to code name-it from scratch or build an experimental protocol from scratch, but you need to be at least fluent in both worlds and say, like, hey,
Yeah.
I understand what those two different things mean. I understand when someone says, I understand what an LLM is good at. I understand what a neural net is good at. I understand when people think about data, what those different things mean. Um, Learn to work with, like, messy data sets. Not just in terms of the data type of memory, but like the data, you might just not be able to get your hands on the data. So how does that work? How do you think through that? And, like, how do you build intermediate points? Spend a lot of time thinking about let me take a step. One question I love to tell my team is, you guys are the expert. You're spending your life on this, right? Like, you're 24/7, you're spending a large part of your life on this problem. You are spending a large part of your financial thing on this problem, right? Both in terms of startups, equity, salary, etc. Right? Like, what would you want to see, which makes you think, like, oh, I probably shouldn't be doing this anymore, right? Like,
Yeah, no, it's a great, that goes back to the patient capital thing, by the way. And then, the flip side of that is like fail fast,
yeah, exactly,
right?
right? Like, so you are the expert. Be very good at kind of, not drinking your own Kool-Aid and being like, hey, like, here's what good looks like, here's what bad looks like. Because not to say that means you quit. It's like, hey, if you can feel, those are your intermediate milestones. Those are your decision points. That, like, allows you to build efficient processes. So think about that, right? Think about, like, hey, I really need to see this in the next 3 months, and that'll make me happy. If I don't see this, what am I going to do? So professionals, like, really, like, build experience in those two worlds and think about, like, across those two worlds, what does that mean? And then, the last thing I'd say is, we talked a lot about understanding the later phases, and of course, learn regulatory, learn clinical, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like, build stuff that's outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You know, Specifically for young founders, right? Like, you're never going to be the most experienced person walking into a room, right? Like, you're always going to be fighting a little bit of an uphill battle. You know, that's okay, right? Like, build great companies were built with great technology, but, like, you've got to be willing to kind of think about, like, if you're a startup and you're competing with pharma, like, you're never going to have as many people, you're never going to have as much money, you're never going to have as much experience, right? Like, you've got to be willing to take risks that they're not. So you've got to be comfortable taking those risks, and it's analyzing
Yeah,
those risks.
for sure. All right. We're ending with the 3 rapid fire questions, which, man, I haven't done this in a while. We did this to some guests, but, like, okay, if you can travel to, like, any year in the future, what year would it be? And what aspect of technology or society would you be most curious about? It's a
Yeah.
great question. I love that. I love the question.
It is a great question. I'm gonna have to go back to my earlier answer of, like, I would love to see 50 years in my lifetime. Like, if we're closer to that future of, like, are we 3D printing? Like, are we creating truly personalized medicine? Right? Like,
Yeah.
are we moving beyond the idea of, here's drugs for populations, but here's drugs for people? It's maybe a more fun answer would go, like, 500 years and see if we have, like, time travel, spaceships or something. But, like, that's just, I spend all my time thinking about it. I'd love to see in my lifetime, you know, when have kids, they're older, like, if that's the world they're going into, because that would be really
Yeah.
cool. And honestly, on a personal level, it'd be, like, so motivating to be like, hey, we're pushing
Yeah.
towards that.
If you woke up in 50 years and there's no interoperable EHR, how are you feeling?
I just think that, I can't even think about that.
All right. Book or podcast, movie, anything like that you've most recently consumed that inspired you. And why would you recommend it?
Okay, I'm gonna cheat a little. It's not a book or movie or podcast. It's a TV show.
Fair, fine. That's okay.
It's called The Pit. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
Oh yeah, I know. It's based out of Pittsburgh, and it's like a doctor show. But
Exactly,
okay,
right? It's as a doctor show, right? The idea is it's set like it's kind of like 24 style, where each episode's like an hour in the life of a doctor.
okay, yeah,
What I think they've done really well is showcase in a way that I don't think has really been done the inner workings and like the level of stress, anxiety, on the call decision making that healthcare physicians have to do. And I say this because even you find yourself working in drug discovery research, and sometimes I feel like you get a little bit too disconnected from the people who are in the field and like what medical problems actually are today. Um,
yeah.
and you know, as much as we're talking about personalized care and medicine, like at one level, there's also a level of like maybe the best problem for AI to solve is like I get a fax from one place, I have a patient bringing
Oh yeah.
out, right? Like, so it was really like I remember watching. I watched like 7 episodes in a row one Saturday, and I went to my now wife, and I was like, "Yo, like I've forgotten how hard it is to just like be in healthcare." That was a little bit of like a level set, and like I went back to next work thinking like those two worlds have to be combined in a different way. Like we can't forget either side.
Oh man, I mean, my fiance is an OR nurse, and then shout out to Dr. Bricker, Healthcare A to Z.
Yeah,
He does this breakdown of like what's actually in a hospital today, right? From every little piece of equipment in the emergency department to the chutes that they send the blood work and the oxygen tanks that you need to change on the beds, and it's like heroics, man.
it's
Um,
wild, guys. Like, yeah.
it's what? All right. So like outside your last question, outside of your professional life, what hobbies or interests do you pursue? And how do you help recharge so you can get some new perspective on tech innovation and all the things you love professionally?
This is okay, I'm gonna give you a really corny answer and then maybe a slightly non-corny answer. So
Fair enough.
I do what I do in the sense of like there's
Yeah.
the annoying parts like filling out Notion pages and vendor request forms. Like all that stuff is boring. But like I do love just like my day, like I get to think about really, really hard problems and think about like how do we solve those in a way that haven't been done. And like it's hard to underestimate. It's hard to underestimate how much of a privilege that is. Like, I truly love that. Like, I think sometimes
Yeah.
I find myself, we're talking about like data networks and how to structure. Like, I find myself like tabling some of those hard problems. So when I need them, I can like, I want to think and like be creative and like it's almost like the puzzle of problem solver in me. So that's the corny answer. Like the love
Yeah.
you do what you love, whatever.
Yeah. Sure.
Actual hobbies. So my wife and I adopted a puppy fairly recently. So like one hobby is trying to get her not to destroy my apartment. And then the second is I love playing chess.
Nice.
I used to be a much better player than I am now, but like I find in a way it allows for me to like try and be really like it allows for me to like get that part of my brain working and being like, it's low stakes. Like if I lose a game of chess, like whatever, fine. But it like allows me
Yeah.
to think about interesting problems, like think stuff. Like it just activate that part of my brain in a low stress up way. And in a fun way. It's like I really love doing that. I think sometimes I'll have like a stressful meeting and I'll go and sit on my couch and play a 5-minute game of chess and come back and being like my brain's not working and it's like a little bit like allowed me to like get a short break and think in a fun way and then go back to vendor request forms and things like that.
Very cool. Well, look, Neel, your energy is amazing. It's contagious. I'm so happy to have you here on this podcast. So happy to call you a colleague and friend. This has been Align Health Insights, episode number 9 with Neel Madhukar. Thank you, Neel.
Thank you guys. Thank you, man.